All right, this is the third video for the urinary system, and I found this cute little cartoon, so I thought I would share it with you. Thought it was kind of sweet. All right, so we're going to continue on with, identifying the three main events that are going on in a nephron for urine formation to happen. So they break it down into three different things that are going on that are involved in producing our urine. And then we're going to talk about the anatomy of the area where we have one of the processes happening, the glomerular filtration. So we're going to talk about that. And then we'll describe the location of these mesangial cells, which I think we already talked about before. And then we'll talk about substances that get freely filtered and ones that are not filtered. All right. So I'm going to first go over the filtration membrane. So do a little bit of the 11 and 12 here, and then we'll come back to 10. All right. And I'm sorry I didn't pull my picture up yet. I do want to show you that one though when we get there. So all right. So with the urinary system, they have a little I think, they had like a little closer up picture, but maybe they don't. Let's go back to this one now. All right, so we're gonna look here at our glomerulus. And so this is describe the two layers that make up the glomerular filtration membrane. So just like we had with the respiratory system, we had the respiratory membrane, and that's where the gas, oxygen and carbon dioxide, that's the part of the lungs where they would cross and be exchanged between the air and the blood. We're going to have the same thing going on in the nephrons of the kidneys. We're going to have this membrane, and they call it the filtration membrane, or glomerular filtration membrane. And it's going to be associated with the blood vessel, and they call those, and it's the capillaries. And the capillaries, glomerular capillaries, have their wall with their little endothelial cells. And then there's an additional cell, or cells, that are called podocytes. And they call them podocytes, I think, because they have like little feet. So I think that's where they get that term podo. But they kind of wrap around the capillaries that are part of the glomerulus. And then when they do that, they have little feet, and the little fetals sort of cross each other and form these little filtration slits, they call it. So we'll look at that in the picture here. So we have you can see the glomerular capillaries that are each one of these loops here. And they have you can see a little bit easier there, the wall of their what's in the wall. So just like a little one cell endothelial layer. And then these little yellow structures are the podocytes. So you'll notice that they, again, are right kind of hugging the surface of the glomerular capillaries. And then they have these like little feet-like structures, or foot processes, I think they call them. And so they will kind of surround the glomerular capillaries, and then they'll form this like little filtration slits there. So the whole purpose of that filtration membrane is, that's what substances that are in the blood that are getting filtered have to go through in order to get out of the blood. So they'll have to pass through the wall of the glomerular capillary, and then they'll have to pass through these little filtration slits of the podocytes. And if they can do that, then they'll end up in the capsular space, and they'll become part of the filtrate. So those are the structures, or two layers, of the glomerular filtration membrane. Next is the mesangial cells. also called the intraglomerular cells, which I think I talked about in the last video. But those little cells are located like between the glomerular capillaries. And we'll talk about them. They have a lot of functions, but we're going to mainly talk about their contracting functions. They can contract, and when they do, since they're associated with the glomerular capillaries, they'll decrease the surface area of the glomerular capillaries. So they can kind of have a role in slowing down filtration. So those are the mesangial cells that you should be familiar with too, because they're going to have a role in controlling how fast the blood gets filtered. All right, so that's that anatomy. And then we're going to, now I'm going to go back up and talk about the structure, the processes that are happening within the nephron to actually form urine. And I think I'll go back to that picture. Yeah, so this is usually how they will, there is a picture that actually, this is just more like anatomy of it. Let me see if I can find the picture that shows the, yeah, there we go. So this picture is a little bit better. So realize the nephron has those convoluted tubules that are twisted. That's kind of why they got that name. And remember the distal convoluted tubule, if it's part of this nephron here, it's not going to be like way over here. It's going to actually be like associated with the glomerulus, and it's part of the juxtaglomerular apparatus. But most textbooks will draw the nephron in this way, kind of like stretch it out. So you have the glomerulus or renal corpuscle here with the glomerulus, and then you'll have the proximal convoluted tubule, Lupa Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct. So just realize this isn't anatomically correct, but it helps to understand these processes and where they're happening. So they usually kind of stretch it out and draw it in this manner. So, okay, so the objective is to know the definition of these three processes that are going on within the nephron to make urine. Okay, so remember the blood is going to come in through the afferent arteriole into the glomerulus. So this is the beginning of the processes. So the first thing that happens to the blood is called glomerular filtration, and that's just where components of the blood are going to be filtered through that filtration membrane that we just talked about, which includes the wall of the glomerular capillary, and then those podocytes, little filtration slits to the podocytes. And so this arrow is showing some components, not all, of the blood being filtered at the glomerulus. So they call that glomerular filtration. So just the movement of substances from the blood within the glomerulus into that capsular space. So that's the definition that you should know for glomerular filtration. And that only happens here. That's the only place it happens, is at the glomerulus. All right, then the next two processes that are going to happen, because once we get that filtrate that's formed here, it's going to move in, remember, into the tubules, and we start calling it tubular fluid, but it's technically not urine yet, because if we were to lose everything that was filtered, we would be in a lot of trouble, because one of the big things that gets filtered is all the water. So all the water in the blood gets filtered, almost all. And so if we didn't, if we just left that in the tubular tubules and let it leave the body, we'd have to drink a whole lot more to keep hydrated, or we would just dehydrate and die pretty quickly. So we don't want this tubular fluid. We need to change it, alter it, as it flows along the tubules. And that's what these two processes are going to do. So it's kind of like fine-tuning the filtrate. So the tubular, and so these are both called tubular because they happen along the tubules. And so you will notice that you can have one of the processes going on at the proximal convoluted tubule, and then the other process going along there as well. So they both happen, at all areas of the tubules, but a lot of times one will happen more than the other one at a certain, so like in the proximal convoluted tubule, you get more tubular reabsorption than you get tubular secretion, and in the distal convoluted tubule, you get more secretion. So, but realize they can happen at both. And so you should know, let me see. Again, with the anatomy, when they did our little simple drawing of the nephron in this way, they also showed in simplified manner that those peritubular capillaries, or vasa recta, that's what this is. And you'll notice that it's called peritubular or vasa recta because it's flowing like right adjacent to our tubules. So the tubular reabsorption is whenever things from the tubular fluid move back into the blood. So they call that reabsorption. So they get reabsorbed and move from the blood back into the body through that, into the blood. So that's tubular reabsorption, movement of substances from the tubular fluid into the blood. So that would be what we want water to do in this area, is move back in. Also, glucose is another substance in the blood that gets almost 100% filtered. So it's in the filtrate, but we don't want to lose all that glucose because we need that for our cells for energy. So almost 100% of it gets reabsorbed back into the blood. Same way with amino acids. We don't want those are things we can use to make proteins in our body, so we don't want to lose those in our blood either. So those are the building blocks of proteins that will go back into our blood too. And then of course water. Yeah, I talked about water. Okay. Then, as the tubular fluid's moving along here, we may have a situation where there's some substance that's still in the blood and we don't want it to be. So like maybe a waste product, a drug, something. And so then our body or our nephrons are going to want to move that substance from the blood into the tubular fluid. And that way, so we can get it into the urine and get rid of it. So the movement of substances from the blood into the tubular fluid is called tubular secretion. So these are pretty much opposites of each other. All right, so those are the simple definitions of those, and we'll go into more detail as far as, we'll get into more detail about how glomerular filtration works and how it's regulated, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about substances that can move between the blood and the tubular fluid, what substances do what. So, all right, now the last one is, give examples of substances that are freely filtered and ones that are not filtered. So that means if we're talking about filtration or filtered, we're talking about the glomerular filtration. So that is going to be anything that's very large. So you guys remember, that's why I kept that picture up. You guys remember capillary exchange? So that wonderful little picture. So that was showing that most of our fluid in our plasma, or all the water in our plasma and all the components of plasma except the big proteins got filtered here, or they got filtered and forced out of the blood and into the interstitial space. So same thing's going to happen at the glomerular capillaries, except those little glomerular capillaries, they're fenestrated, so they have even more little pores in them, so more places for things to leave. And then they also have a higher blood pressure than those capillaries. I think these were like 20 to 40 was the blood pressure, right, of the continuous capillaries. So when it comes to our glomerulus, we have like a higher, it's like 60 millimeters of mercury in these glomerular capillaries. So many more things are going to leave, which we want to happen. But it's only going to be the smaller plasma components. So all the water in the plasma, all those ions, glucose, amino acids, all those things are going to, waste products, which we'll talk about them, all those are going to leave. And basically what's left in the blood is going to be the red blood cells, all the cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and then like really large proteins. So that's what's going to stay in the blood, and then the rest is going to be end up in the capsular space, become a filtrate, and then move on into the tubular fluid. So, all right, I'll get working on the next video.